Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Love Needs No Words. Today we're joined by Steph Curtis, who some of you may know for her brilliant blog Steph's Two Girls and author of PDA in the Family. Steph has dedicated years to raising awareness of PDA or pathological demand avoidance through her writing after her youngest daughter's diagnosis at 2.5 years old. Welcome, Steph.
Hi.
Hi, so good to have you. So I guess a good place to start is if you could just tell us a little bit about your girls.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the two girls, they are now 19 and 17. And yeah, I can't believe, obviously time flies, but our youngest was 2.5 when she was diagnosed with autism. And it was quite soon after that we found out about pathological demand avoidance.
So for those that are listening that haven't heard of that before, can you just explain what it is for us?
Yeah, so PDA or pathological demand avoidance is a bit of a mouthful. It's a profile or a type of autism. So it's kind of, at the moment, it's thought to be that anybody with a PDA profile is autistic. So as I said, our girl was diagnosed autistic first, but then it's kind of like a set of characteristics that define PDA. So as well as the overarching three things that usually define autism, which I will totally forget now, the repetitive behaviors, social and communication difficulties, so that those are all present, but then there's extra characteristics. So I think there's 6. So I can run through those for you. So a PDA person would resist and avoid everyday demands. So we're not talking about just things that are difficult to do or that are not fun or boring. It runs through everyday life where things are very difficult for them to do, even the things that should be fun and enjoyable. But they resist and avoid. And then the way they might avoid that is often used. So this is kind of the second point or characteristic, is they might use social strategies to avoid. So they won't just say no outright. They will come up, maybe with distracting the people trying to give the demands, or coming up with, kind of a bit wild reasons why they can't do something. So as an example, I remember when the National Autistic Society did a conference about PDA, they showed a young boy in an office with a pediatrician, and he was standing the far side of a table, and the pediatrician was trying to get him to come to her to do the assessment at her desk. And he said, "I can't because my legs don't work." And he was clearly standing there, with his legs and moving a little bit that side of the table. But that was his kind of excuse or reason for not being able to go and do what she wanted him to do. And, at that sort of young age, that was exactly the kind of reason our daughter would give for not doing things as well. So yeah, those kind of social strategies. And then another point is that PDAers, so PDA people, sometimes called PDAers, they appear sociable on the surface, which is not something really that was generally associated with other autistic profiles. But it seems that, the majority or all of those with a PDA profile really, they kind of like being around other people. They seem very sociable, but actually underneath the surface, they often struggle to understand what's going on. They don't understand those social rules or, hierarchies. All of that, is not quite so obvious for them to pick up on. So that's 3 of them. The 4th thing is about excessive mood swings. So going from 0 to 100 suddenly, switching a bit like a light switch on and off. Often there seems to be no real reason for, the demand or the avoidance or that extreme swing in mood. And then another point is about PDA people are often very comfortable in role play. So they're said to have great imaginations, which again is not something that, back when our girl was diagnosed, 15 years ago, that wasn't said to be common with an autistic profile more generally. So yeah, they're very good at being very creative and often using role play as a way to avoid demands. So you might find children being, a cat and actually living out life as a cat because cats don't do homework or, don't sit at the dinner table or whatever it is. So again, kind of other more creative reasons for avoiding demands. And then I think the last one is about obsessive behavior, and obsessive's not the best word, but that, that's used in kind of the general autism diagnosis. But rather than with other autistic profiles, it might be about, some commonly things that said, like trains might be an interest for autistic individuals, or something a bit more out of the ordinary, like lifts or electricity pylons or something like that. But for PDA people, their focus is often on other people or characters rather than sort of objects and things. And it can often be that focus is on the main caregiver rather than other people. But sometimes, and this is something that's very common as well, especially at a younger age, in a school playground, you might find a PDA child kind of in charge or bossing one or two other children around, because they're then in control of that situation. And certainly for our girl, we found there's a lot of anxiety, and if a PDA person can be in control of what's going to happen and they're leading all the play and the rules of that play, then that takes away the anxiety for them. So yeah, that's a very common thing as well.
Also, you mentioned some similarities there with autism, but also there's real differences. So it must be really difficult to diagnose PDA with an autistic person.
Yeah, so you have to be, I suppose, lucky, or we certainly were lucky in terms of the pediatrician we first saw. But what happened after that assessment and diagnosis for our daughter was we were sent away with details of a support group for mums of other autistic girls. Because back then, again, it was a while ago, it was said that girls really presented differently to boys. And we know a bit more now, that's not always the case, and that what's considered a girl's profile might, apply to boys as well, and vice versa. But certainly, it was said that girls would share similar experiences, autistic girls. So I would go along to these meetups with these other mums who, all had children just slightly a year or two older than mine. Sasha was only, 3.5 at the time. And they would talk about their girls, and I'd sit there and I'd think, well, some of this sounds familiar, but actually you're not really describing my girl. I can see what you mean and what your shared experiences are, but it's just a bit different for us in our house. And there were some classic things, such as their girls all seemed to be, quite academic and quite high masking and wanting to abide by the rules, and none of those things kind of really applied to our girl. So I would go home after these meetings and I'd be a bit more confused, and I'd think, well, is it autism? Although she's been diagnosed with autism, I don't know. It sounds a bit not like them. So I did the old, turn to Google and the internet searching. And that's when I came across what was called the PDA Contact Forum. And it's now the national charity for PDA, called the PDA Society. But on there was a forum and all parents chatting about situations where our girl reacted in exactly the same way, as these other parents were talking about. So that's how I first came across the term pathological demand avoidance. And I've kind of gone through that, is it or isn't it autism? But when we found this kind of profile and this list of characteristics, then it made total sense, really.
That light bulb moment.
Yeah. And what was the diagnosis like for you? Obviously, we're quite new to the journey, and I guess it wasn't that easy for us. So what was it like back then? And have you seen a big difference, or have you seen things get worse in regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I always say it's not maybe the best word to use, but we were lucky, I think, that we saw someone very good who recognized it very young in our girl. And I went through a period of going, oh, well, maybe she's, very obviously autistic then if they've recognized it so easily. But at this age, 2.5, 3, you could have walked into a room of children and you wouldn't pick our girl out for being any different. The reason actually we'd gone for a diagnosis was because her language was delayed. And that initially was thought to be one of those key characteristics of PDA. But they've since kind of refined that and said that's not necessarily the case, that, all PDAs would have a delay in language. But it certainly was for our girl. She had a lot of sounds and she was trying to kind of babble and communicate, but her words weren't coming out clear. So it was actually a speech assessment that we went for first, and they referred us to the pediatrician. So the speech therapist obviously saw something in the behavior as well. But also, when I say that word behavior, it's something that I want to make quite clear, that our girl has never had challenging or violent behavior. Challenged us in terms of she wasn't, agreeing to do things that our older daughter had done very easily. So, for us, the typical parenting, rewards, consequences, all of that had worked fine for our older daughter, but there was just nothing we could do to get our younger daughter to engage in something that she wasn't able to do. And of course, at the time when we didn't know much about it, we thought it was just her choosing to, or not wanting to do something. But then it didn't make sense when we knew it was something she loved to do, like go swimming, and yet she would refuse to leave the house, even though that activity we knew she would really enjoy. So there were other things that came into it, sensory issues, obviously a big, autistic profile more generally issue. So they did cause some problems. So for example, she didn't wear socks for quite a long time because they never felt right. So that was one thing that might have stopped her leaving the house. But, we solved that with seamless socks. And then, they were fine, but there were still barriers to her that we couldn't understand when she was young, why she wasn't able to leave the house. So yeah, it's taken kind of a lot of years of detective work from our side to try and find out why she avoids things. And a lot of it, I think, is down to anxiety.
Yeah, but I guess like anything, once you discovered what it was, it became really helpful for you, because then you knew what was causing it and could help her in any way that you could find.
Yeah, and I think that's really key, because the kind of strategies that are suggested for autistic children more generally really didn't work for our girls. So one example of that is a Now and Next board that is often used in primary schools, but telling a PDA child to do something is what causes a lot of the demand avoidance, because that's increases the anxiety. So just doing Now and Next, it wasn't making it simple for her, it was making her have to do something, and that was the issue. So yeah, a lot of those kind of approaches didn't work, the standard approaches. So that's why it really helped us to know about PDA and tell other people about it.
Yeah. How did you learn some of those sort of parenting strategies that obviously kind of go against what the advice that's given to you as parenting a child with autism? Yeah, how did you go about finding the approach to take?
So yeah, it was really trial and error, and I suppose her reactions led us in a lot of this, because we just weren't able to make her do things that we wanted her to do a lot of the time. So yeah, it's never even a finished process ever. We're still working on that. But I think as a parent, I've started to ask myself, why would we try and make her do this, like sit at the table to eat, for example? Just because society says that's a good thing to do has not been enough for me, because of her reactions and her clear difficulties with doing that, and conforming to all those kind of society rules that there are. So I've learned to question a lot more about why am I trying to make her do something, and it is totally against the norm and what you expect as a parent to do, and what we did for our older girl, and it was very successful for our older daughter. So it's a real shift in your mindset living this way.
I think we've learnt that, Kirst, haven't we?
Yeah,
that,
we really have.
And because it was our first, I think you do try and fit in with what society wants you to do. I mean, I was saying, I remember taking him to a soft play and he wasn't interested, but I was trying to do it every week because it was something that, I thought was the norm to do. And then it gets to a point where for us, it was the diagnosis and getting a better understanding that it was, well, let's not put him through something that's going to make him feel really anxious. Let's go and do something that he'll enjoy, and getting into their world, exactly what you just said, really.
Yeah, exactly. Learning what makes them happy and what makes them tick. Yeah, for sure.
How have you dealt with that as a parent? Because I mean, can probably speak on behalf of you, Amy, as well. Like, there's certain things I think that are relatively, you're doing the best thing for your child, but there's other things, like you touched on the if your daughter doesn't want to sit at the table and eat her food, then that's fine. But obviously there's certain things like that I think you feel under pressure as a parent to like instill these certain things in your children, because that's what's expected. How have you dealt with that?
Yeah. It is difficult, and it depends also on the wider support network or not, and other family members, and how much pressure you kind of allow other people to put on you. So I guess, yeah, I've had to be quite strong and build up quite a thick skin and say, I know this is what's best for our daughter. You know, and I know she's 17 now, you know, I can say she's not going to be going out to dinner parties or, you know, having any big meals in someone else's house. It really doesn't matter that she eats, you know, off a plate where she's comfortable on the sofa. That's not a big deal for us now. But, you know, I do remember when it was, and when you feel like you're having to relax your standards maybe, or what you want to happen, and what you want your children to join in. But for us, it was clear, you know, how much anxiety and distress that kind of thing was causing. So I think, you know, I did it because we have, you know, an older daughter as well, for a family life that was calm and not always, you know, fighting really. I think I wanted to try and make it a calm household. So
that's amazing. And I think for many people listening, it's lovely to hear from somebody that's sort of been through the journey and their child's in their teens and just learning from what you found, really. So how would you say your daughter's autism and PDA profiles affected her through life, you know, specifically through school as well?
Yeah, so school has been really difficult, because when you stop and think about it, you know, a school is full of demands all day long, and they don't all make sense. So it's another thing, you know, I've started to question the school system a lot more, whereas it was something I fully believed in. My own mum was a teacher, you know, and our older daughter's done very well through school. So, you know, it's not that I came from that standpoint. You know, I didn't want to home educate, but I was open to that idea. As I said, because my mum was a teacher, I would have quite liked the idea of home educating. But for our PDA girls, she really wanted to be in a school, because she it's coming back to that sociable aspect. She liked being around other people. She still kind of wants to be around other people, but she finds those relationships really difficult. So school, well, and the relationships with others is one side of it, but actually the academic workload and the way children are taught to a curriculum that is not necessarily anything to do with their interests, it's just been very difficult for her. And there's, you know, there's different shades of this, you know, or, you know, every individual is going to be different, and some children might like, you know, or enjoy that kind of way of academic learning. But for our PDA, it's very much, you know, it needs to be about what her interests are, and she doesn't see the point in, you know, learning, well, English, you know, and all the different bits of grammar that they do these days. So yeah, it's been a challenge. So she stayed in mainstream up until the age of 10. She did have support in mainstream, so they were very good, her, you know, primary school. But then she had some time out while we tried to find another school. There's a whole load of people whose children are not fitting into that mainstream, but they're also not fitting into the other special schools out there. We did try a special school because there was literally nothing else. You know, in our county, there's no schools for autistic children specifically. So we had to try a special school. That really didn't work, because Sasha is not behind with her learning in any way. She's very, you know, academically able in one sense. She's just not able to sit down and study in that manner, or to take exams and tests. The whole pressure of that is too much. So she had some time there that didn't work so well, and then had some time out, has tried some, you know, medical absence tutoring at another specialist school that didn't work. And now she is in another specialist school, but she only goes for a very reduced time, and the learning is based around her interests. So yeah, it's the school journey has been quite challenging. And it's, you know, it's one thing, you know, as so many of us, and often it is the female, not always, but female carers, you know, I didn't get to carry on with my career because I had to be here to pick up that, you know, her not being able to be in a school full time, and still am today. So yeah, it's been a long path, that.
Yeah. How did the school journey affect her?
Yeah, so she's, you know, she loved being at mainstream. She didn't really have a problem with it until, you know, I would say maybe about 6 months before she actually fully refused and wouldn't cross the doorstep. You know, she'd been saying it wasn't right. We all knew it wasn't right. We kind of, there was a big, we actually renovated a house at that time. So that's why it probably went on longer than it should have done, that she was still at that school. But it had been really good up until that point. But then that was year 5, you know, and they're starting to prepare for the SAT test, which we knew she was never going to be able to sit. So she loved that school. The special school, just made her feel even more different because she was nothing like the other children there. And I think, some of that still follows on, and the kind of some of the things that happen there, I'd say maybe now there's some school trauma from things that have happened, but she doesn't just want to be at home. She still wants to be at school and doing something, just not traditional learning. So yeah, it's been, I don't know. Yeah, we've got until next summer, and that'll be the end of her education, really. And we'll see what happens then.
How does that feel, that you're coming to the end of that journey?
I mean, good and scary at the same time, obviously, because, you wonder what's going to happen next. But, in my eyes, the whole education system has not done a lot for her anyway.
Yeah.
So, I can't say I'll be that sad to say goodbye.
What do you think the next few years looks like for her? Do you think she'll go into something that she really enjoys?
Yeah, but she's not likely. And again, what we're talking about individuals and differences in individuals. She is not likely to be out in a workplace working with other people, in a in-person environment. But she is capable, of maybe building her own business online from home. She loves digital art and creating animations, videos. So she's taught herself all of those skills. We have no, idea how to do that, anyone else in the family, but so she is developing, but just it's going to be a different route to all those traditional routes. But so many more children are kind of, going down those paths, I think, these days. So I'm not really too worried about it. I think with everything, I keep in mind it just takes longer than it does for, other typically developing children who are kind of all pushed down this path at the same age. So.
And the world we live in as well, it's all geared up for that kind of jobs, which is brilliant for her as well. And just moving on slightly to something you then got involved in, was your brilliant blog. So how did that all start? Was it kind of a way to kind of put everything you were feeling down on paper?
Yeah, so literally that first the appointment with a paediatrician, so we'd had the speech therapy assessment, but then a few months later the paediatrician appointment, and it was kind of a shock. I didn't know any autistic people at that point, apart from the film Rain Man, but I wasn't expecting that, and it was kind of a shock but a relief at the same time, because then some of her behavior sort of made sense, why she was avoiding things. So I came back from that appointment, and something told me that I was going to have to repeat myself a lot with, in these kind of meetings with different professionals, such as, I was being asked what kind of a birth was it, did she point at things, all of these kind of standard questions. So I just kind of wanted to sum it up, but get out how I was feeling, and also tell other people who knew us, that this, because I think when I told someone about the diagnosis, they were kind of like, really? Because as I said, she wasn't really acting, in short bursts to anyone else. It wouldn't have been very noticeable. So I kind of wanted to explain what sort of things were happening at home that made this diagnosis make sense. So I was glad I'd done it, but it was a bit of a spur of the moment kind of thing. But I called it Steph's Two Girls because I knew that it would really have an effect on our eldest as well. The sort of diagnosis was a whole family thing, really.
Yeah. How has her diagnosis, or how did her diagnosis affect you all as a family?
Yeah, so it takes, I would say it's probably taken my husband a bit longer to accept that. And he has written a chapter in our book, so he kind of explains that as well. And I think, when you've come from a more traditional upbringing, this is really, so far outside of that. But it does take some time to get used to that. And for our older daughter, there were a lot of occasions where she would have to, not give in to her sister, but certainly be accommodating and understanding of her and what was causing her the problems, and things like family games, board games were not going to work because Sasha needed to be in control of those. She needed to set her own rules and needed to win. So there was, there were lots of things like that that made it more difficult for our older daughter. But instinctively, she was very good at, really taking on those same kind of approaches that we did. So, and they were both so young when she was diagnosed. It wasn't really a case of we sat down and had serious conversations about all of this. It just sort of evolved.
Yeah.
How old was she when your youngest was diagnosed?
Sasha was 2.5, so our oldest was about 4.5.
Okay.
Wow,
So it's always just been part of the fabric of your family. It's all
Yeah.
they've ever kind of known. Yeah.
And what's their relationship like now? Sort of how has it grown over the years?
Yes, that's interesting. It was really good until probably a couple of years ago. And actually what happened was our eldest ended up being diagnosed autistic and with ADHD as well, but only at the age of 16.
Sure.
So she, as I said, she'd done everything, super well, very good in school and outside of school, drama lessons, all sorts going on for her. So there was nothing really, again, nothing obvious. She was very, good at masking, whereas Sasha wasn't. I used to say for Sasha, what you see is what you get, and everybody at school believed us, which was obviously a pro of that, because they could see her behaviour and how much she would avoid at school as well. Of course, the downside of that is then she didn't get on well at school. So it's a bit, good in some ways and not in others. But our eldest was doing brilliantly until their pandemic, really, and lockdowns, and that lack of structure at school really kind of brought about her her struggles. So that did have an impact because of her then sort of journey through that diagnosis and understanding did, I would say, make it difficult for the two of them to be together for a while. But I know our eldest still would be, I was going to say she would be very much there. She's actually studying at college in America, so she's a long way away now.
Amazing.
She's in her second year of that. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. But they have a relationship, but relationships are difficult for Sasha because she's not interested in to and fro. She can't really talk about general everyday life things, and that's where mainstream schools started getting difficult for her, because all the girls were talking about makeup and boys and pop music. And that was nothing at all to do with what Sasha was interested in. Gaming really is Sasha's, life, love, and that she wants to talk to other people about what she likes about it. She can't really do that back and forth in conversation. So, yeah, it's difficult.
That's really interesting about your eldest daughter. How did that feel when? Did you identify it? Did she identify it? What kind of drove you? Obviously, you mentioned the pandemic.
Yeah, it was interesting. The ADHD was diagnosed first, actually, but she's not. Again, I think I knew about ADHD, of course, from being involved, in the autism community. But Sasha was never diagnosed with ADHD, although it's possible. Again, she has. For us, we haven't kind of gone down that path because Sasha won't take any medication at all anyway, so we don't necessarily feel there's a lot that would change for Sasha if she was diagnosed ADHD. But for our older daughter, she's not, what was back then the typical ADHD thing of a hyperactive, boy mostly. She is very much the inattentive, and it's all going on in her brain, and there's not, there's, that very subtle jiggling of legs and things like that. So that there was just not obvious signs, which is why really it was all not diagnosed until much later. And for her, the autism, obviously she's nothing like her younger sister, so that probably stopped her from saying, oh, maybe that's me too, because it was nothing like Sasha.
Yeah. Has the diagnosis helped her, do you think, since finding out?
I think so. I mean, I think it's that's a difficult age to have a diagnosis, and when you want to be the same as all the other children, then that makes it more difficult. But I think knowing, I've heard over all this journey from other adults who are being diagnosed much later in life and who really wish they'd known and understood themselves better when they were younger. So I am glad that it's happened.
I think a really important point that you make that's probably relevant to a lot of people listening as well is that there's not two people that typically look the same. Even in the same family, things can look very, very different. I mean, even for Amy and I, our boys are very different and yet have the same diagnosis. So and that's hard, isn't it, sometimes when you're talking to other people, and you've mentioned it before where people are like, really, I wouldn't have thought that, and you start to think in your head, am I making this up? Am I trying to find something with my child that's not there? But I was reading through your blog and I was really it really resonated with me, some of the stuff that you were talking about actually, as the person that spends the most time with your child, you can see, and you can just tell, can't you, when there's something that just doesn't seem to add up for whatever reason, and just So for a lot of people listening, I think that'll be a really important message for them.
Yeah, and it helped us, I think, because I would never say that our older daughter has a PDA profile. That's not who or what she's like, so I can see the difference more clearly, I guess, in our girls and how that PDA has presented. Because demand avoidance is something that lots of people have. You know, we all don't want to do things at times, like I said, when it's too difficult or not fun, or you're just not in the mood, or whatever it is, at all sorts of different ages, particularly teenagers. You know, can be very, because there's a lot of hormone changes going on and everything else, big sort of changes in their life. But yeah, this has been so obvious to us from such a young age with Sasha that, you know, it is very different to just the kind of demand avoidance that everybody else has.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the demand avoidance, because with my son, when we were speaking to the paediatrician, it was actually raised to us about potential PDA in my son Max. So I mentioned it to the paediatrician when he was going through his diagnosis journey, and she kind of brushed it off and was like, oh, you know, all children who have autism have an element of demand avoidance. So I guess where's that line between demand avoidance that's commonly linked to autism and then a PDA profile?
Yeah, so it's you know, I'd probably link it back to that word pathological, which is not a nice word, and you know, there's much discussion in the community, people not liking that. You know, I think extreme demand avoidance might be better, and some people call it pervasive demand avoidance or a persistent drive for autonomy. You know, I'm not sure that describes our girl quite as well, but because it is, you know, for me it's extreme demand avoidance, but it's driven by the anxiety for her. You know, and it's not oppositional, awkward or defiant behavior, it's none of those things. And as I said, for her it's not violent, you know, challenging behavior. She would very much hide under a table rather than cause any trouble at school by avoiding, but she just would withdraw and not and avoid doing that, or use those social strategies to avoid. But the pathological bit, meaning that it's through everything and it's kind of something they can't help themselves. They're not making a choice to do this. For them, it'd be nicer, you know, if she could have gone swimming where she wanted to go, but for whatever reason, you know, it's like an internal battle against that demand that someone else is placing on you.
Did you find that difficult growing up with both girls, with a profile like that? Was it very much split parenting? You would do things with
so we did a lot, and we, you know, it's been a few years since we've had a family holiday, because different wants and needs. You know, and we'd go out when Sasha was younger, we did leave the house a lot more and get to do some fun things, but we would always, I would say, we'd always have a plan A, B, C and Z. You know, we would have escape routes. I'd have to do a lot more planning for Sasha about what was going to happen there. And yeah, we would, you know, I remember going to watch Disney on Ice, I think, as, you know, the four of us as a family, and within about 10 minutes Sasha is like no and had left. So I, you know, went and sat outside with Sasha, but wanted our older daughters to still be able to enjoy that experience. So yeah, she stayed in with her dad, and that's, we've kind of, you know, we're lucky that, you know, we have had that sort of balance and been able to split things, and it's not obviously always possible, and for single parents it's more difficult. But I always say, you know, try and you know, bring in, whether it's family members or friends or neighbors or anybody else, to kind of, you know, help that family dynamic, because it is really difficult.
You mentioned about your career being, you know, put on hold, I guess, because of the pressures of having to look after your child. I can imagine there's a lot of people who are sort of in the same place as you, but in credit to you, you've set up a blog which has helped so many people, and you've written a book which is amazing. Do you think going through that process has kind of almost helped you process things throughout the journey?
Yeah, definitely. I always call it free therapy, my blog. So it was kind of sharing was helping me as much as it was helping other people. So yeah, I've been lucky that I've been able to do that. Again, that word. But yes, I'm feeling pleased that that's happened, and it was because of the blog that then the book came about. So I was approached by a publisher who'd seen the blog and suggested that it would be good to put it in a book. So
and how was that? What was that process like, and how long did it take?
So writing a book is very different to writing a blog. So it wasn't easy, very much because, you know, a blog is very much about shorter posts, you know, fewer words and very here and now, whereas the book is, you know, it's our story. I also know that, you know, the publishers would have liked me to do like a parent advice kind of book and tell other people what to do. But I've always said, you know, I know what to do with our girl in our situation. and I can offer other approaches to people, but it's going to be what works is going to be different for every family. So I've never been very good at telling other people what to do. So I just said, I can write our experiences, and hopefully people take something from that, even if it's just not feeling so alone. Because I know that helped me when I found, as I said, that PDA, the contact forum, the other parents who were saying the same things. It helped me think that I wasn't going crazy, and I wasn't making it all up or just being too weak or any other things that other people might have suggested. So yeah, if I have been able to help people along the way with that, it's great.
Were you a writer before you started the blog?
No.
You write so well.
I was a buyer.
Okay.
I used to buy toys and stationery for places like Asda and Sainsbury's. So
a real U-turn. Yeah,
it was meant to be.
It was meant to be, because you write so well.
Oh, thanks. So I don't really even consider myself an author. I am now. I guess I've got the book, but it's I never desperately wanted to write a book, and I don't think I write well. I just write from the heart. I just write the truth, our truth, really, and that's all I can do.
But I think that must capture people, because I came across your blog long before I was on this journey with my son. I mean, years before. I think I even came across it before I even had children. So through a mutual group that we're associated with. So the fact that captured my interest, and I didn't have a child going through that, I think is testament to how you write. And I suppose when you put your heart into something, that comes across, doesn't it?
It's interesting, because I think one of the things that has made people come back or read is because it was personal, and because I have shared our personal story, and there's a lot of talk about whether you should share things about your children online, but I don't think I would have had the amount of people reading if I hadn't done that. If you're more closed, then people don't necessarily even believe you, so I kind of, the fact I've put it all out there has helped. But I did have qualms about that along the way, but I think overall it's been a good thing to do, and I've done it with both girls have been aware of this most of the time, obviously not when they were first and they were very young, but I checked, they were both fine with it and with the book, so yeah.
Oh, I bet it's been so incredibly helpful, because it's not until you read things or you listen to things where you think, right, I really need to go to the paediatrician now, because we all go through that phase where we're not quite sure whether there is something, but you just have this inkling, and all you need to do is read a blog or listen to something, and you're like, right, I'm going, because you just need somebody else to say, absolutely, 100%. And what was it like for your husband, writing his chapter?
Oh, it's funny, because he only wrote one chapter, and I did there's 11 or 12 others, but lots of people have said that his chapter is the best, which of course is highly insulting. But he is very funny, but yeah, he's obviously managed to squeeze the whole of our lifespan, so it covers really from diagnosis or a bit before that all the way through to probably when Sasha was about 14. So yeah, he's managed to squeeze all of that into one chapter, but get across his experiences very well in that, and with emotion and honesty as well. And I don't think a lot of men write about their experiences of being a send parent, so
or even talk about it.
I don't know how many men are reading the book, but it would be good. That's obviously why we did it, why we wanted to include it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think they don't read stuff, and I think they don't often talk about it either.
No, and in fact, he says in his chapter, that he was very adamant he didn't want to read books about autism, and the reason he gave was that he just wanted to get to know our daughter for who she was, and not be kind of blinded by all these different descriptions of autism, which all sounds very good, but actually as a mum I would have liked him to read some of the other autism books. But he did read the main book, I call it the Bible, about pathological demand avoidance, and he did read that and go, oh yes, this is definitely our daughter. So he was very much on board from that point, and that helped.
What's the Bible?
It's called Understanding. I'm trying to see if I've got it here. I have. Understanding Pathological Demand Avoidance Syndrome in Children. So this was written about that time, around the time my daughter was diagnosed, I think. But obviously, PDA as a condition, if that's the right word, was recognised back in the 1980s. So kind of in terms of the timescale, when you think about, when autism was first recognised before it then became more talked about and understood. We're kind of on the same trajectory, you know, timeline. But yeah, so that was written around that time. And honestly, when I read it, I almost cried, because it was like they were describing my daughter. So even though it is, you know, a few years old now, and some of the kind of, you know, thoughts maybe have changed slightly, but not much really. You know, the essence of it is still all really good, and there's good approaches and everything in there as well. So I still recommend that to everyone.
And what has feedback been like from your blog and your book?
It was hard work to get the message out there, but that's, you know, I felt that I was doing this for, I mean, it's not very altruistic, is it? Or I was doing it for Sasha. I was trying to make her life smoother, really, and explain to people why she wasn't just getting on with things and doing what, you know, they wanted her to do. So I really just wanted to explain PDA to get the message out, but also I knew there were so many families who hadn't heard about it. That, you know, I just felt if people heard PDA, then they could, you know, research it for themselves and make up their own minds, but that it was just still not very well known about. So the hard work was really trying to get that blog in front of people. So social media has been the way to do that, which is great. There's obviously some downsides of social media, and it has taken a lot of my time, but you know, at times I've had that time because I've been at home with a daughter who couldn't get to school. So yeah, it took a lot of effort, but hopefully it's all been worth it. You know, there's people who have read our story from the early days, you know, and it's great. On a Facebook page particularly, you know, there's a lot of people interact, and that's really nice. You know, I know that people are there and understanding it all. The book, I don't know yet. I mean, I had some lovely reviews, but yeah, I don't know how it's sold or anything. So.
And what's it like sort of reading feedback of people that have, you know, that you've really helped, and like we said, they've now gone on their own journey because of it?
Yeah, I mean, I keep a little note on my phone, you know, when people send me messages. It's so nice to hear that, you know, it's just helped someone else. If I think it can make a difference to, you know, that family and that child, about how they're, you know, understood and worked with and whatever, then it's great.
A couple of our listeners actually wanted us to ask you a couple of questions. So Lucy said, and you've briefly talked about signs of, or some of the things to look out for, but what were the first signs in your daughter that you thought maybe that she had a PDA profile?
So it was more about, initially it was about the speech delay, and that's when we then went for the autism diagnosis. But I guess it was the not responding to those typical autism approaches that, you know, school were using and were told to use. So it was the, you know, a very strong avoidance, as I said, of everything really, you know, and that can go from toothbrushing to going out to, you know, to do a fun activity. So yeah, those were, I think, the key things that we noticed.
Thanks for that. And Sophie said, how has it developed later in life? Has she found sort of ways to cope with it?
Yeah, so this is really important, because I always say one of the things that I've done a post about the top 10 things about PDA, which kind of, you know, is explaining really what PDA, but one of the things I say is that PDA children grow up to be PDA adults. You know, it's not something you grow out of, but there are PDA adults out there who are also writing about their lives, and I think you can learn so much from them. They're so insightful, and I always say, and there's some great videos on YouTube as well, that nobody would make this stuff up if, you know, they didn't have to. It's not an easy way to live. So, you know, I find it really helpful to listen to them. So when clearly they have developed some kind of coping strategies, you know, and approaches that work for them. You know, there's people who are in partnerships, relationships, work, you know, everything really. And again, it comes back to the individual and how much they can cope with. For our daughter, it's been more, you know, the hormone change and the being more aware of other people, you know, has kind of come in, but that's not made her any more able to change herself to fit in with other people, even if there's more of a desire. And I think anxiety shows itself more now, because, which seems strange, because actually, you know, a lot of the time she's at home and we have a very calm environment, but not being able to do things almost feels stronger now, whereas we probably, when she was younger, carried her along with us a bit more. You know, like I said, we would try and go out places, but then it would all go wrong and we'd have to make a quick exit. But I suppose, yeah, we've changed more and pulled back on how much we tried to do and all of that. So life is calmer. It's once you understand it, things do get easier in some ways.
And the final question, what advice would you have for yourself 17 years ago? And
Oh,
what
God.
advice do you have for people that are at the start of their journey now?
Yeah, so the PDA Society is the place I always recommend for all the best information. There's a national charity. They have a helpline where they will answer people's inquiries if you have specific questions about it, or trouble with school. They have a lot of great information on their website, such as guides to EHCPs and, all sorts, and kind of how settings can help. A lot of other professionals involved with them. It's kind of about finding the right people who do believe you and who are going to be supportive, and learning how to say no and walk away from those who aren't. Really doing, what's best for your own child, and believing in yourself that you know what suits your own child and what's best. And then I suppose, a bit of advice would be not to worry too much about the future, because nobody knows what's going to happen. But, I remember being there and, worrying about that next stage and how it was going to be. And I think, I've learned to be a lot more relaxed now and just accept that things are not happening at the same speed and pace and, in a traditional, typical way. But, it'll still all be okay.
Yeah, because I guess it can rob you of just enjoying your child in that moment. And there's loads to enjoy. One of the things that we do, Amy and I have done doing this podcast, that's been really helpful, I think, for both of us, is just reflecting back on some of the things that we, like a year ago, perhaps weren't even sure whether they'd be doing. And am I right in thinking that your daughter's doing driving lessons?
She's just had her first driving lesson. Yeah, I never thought she would be driving, and in fact, I say that not because I didn't think she was capable, but she didn't want to. So she was adamant she was not going to drive. But then all of a sudden, just changed her mind and got in a car. And I never say never. I can't imagine her being out on the roads, because, or certainly not without anyone, but I could imagine her driving with me in the car. It would be about what would she do in a situation if it wasn't going to plan, for example. That would probably be the tricky bit. But, we'll think of ways around that if it gets that far and we have to. But I never thought she'd be doing a driving lesson.
Oh, that's amazing.
You and your girls must have the most incredible bond.
We do.
Steph, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. We really appreciate it.
It was lovely to chat with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.